Hello and welcome to episode 73 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast. For those of you who are listening for the first time, my name is Julian and I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Synergen Group. I'm passionate about all things leadership and management. So passionate, in fact, that I decided to start a podcast about it. And here we are in season 2, and my purpose for the podcast continues to be the same, to raise the standard of leadership. In today's show, I speak with Wendy Born, who is the author of The Languages of Leadership, How to Use Your Words, Actions and Behaviours to Influence Your Team, Peers and Boss. Wendy works with leaders and leadership teams to become more effective and productive by showing them how to remove all the stuff that gets in their way. She helps them cut through by effectively managing everyone they work with. She shows leaders how to become better by driving performance, increasing accountability, having higher quality conversations, building trust, and working towards a common goal. As a result, leaders who work with Wendy are able to engage in constructive conflict, be more collaborative within and outside of their business, and make better, higher quality decisions. Now, during the course of the conversation, we explore Wendy's book in detail. I start by asking Wendy, why did she decide to write this book? We speak about the 6 levels of leadership and why it is important to be courageous. We also explore the idea of a leader being a catalyst for change. And I do finish up the interview by asking Wendy about her top 5 trust killers and why building a connection is so important. So keep listening, and as always, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about the interview with Wendy Born, author of The Languages of Leadership. Happy listening.
Welcome to the Synergen Leadership Podcast with Julian Carl. Julian returns in 2019 with weekly conversations with leaders and authors from Australia and around the world, giving you the opportunity to share in their journey and learn from their expertise and knowledge. Julian also shares some of the tools and techniques he uses as a leader, mentor, and facilitator, helping you to build your leadership capability and improve your confidence as a leader.
Thank you, Wendy, for making time to come out to the Synergen HQ and talk to me today about your book. So why did you decide to write this book, The Languages of Leadership?
Mm-hmm. So over the years of working with leaders, I had the pleasure of seeing all of the amazing things that they did to themselves and all the equally as amazing bad things that they did to themselves. And I watched them kind of flourish and go on and do amazing things. And I also watched some eat themselves alive. So as I look back over the years of working with leaders, I could identify these 6 traits, or languages as I call them, which are words, behaviours and actions. And so I kind of pulled it all together and synthesised it into this book.
Right. And how did you find the book writing process? I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. How did you find that process?
I didn't find it too bad, actually. I worked with an editor who helped me to put the plan in place, and which was brilliant because going through that process, I was able to chunk things where they should be and align things together. And then once I was happy with the plan, I just started to write, and 9 weeks later I had a book.
9 weeks?
Yeah, 9 weeks. So it just kind of poured out of me. It wasn't that bad at all. And my editor tells me she didn't have to do much editing. So
the complete opposite of my experience.
Probably, yeah.
Well, there's this, I'd like to start with an excerpt from your introduction, if I can.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, it was enough just to lead your team and that was it. But organisations today are more complex. Departments are vast. Reporting structures are multifaceted. As leaders, we're expected to manage so many different relationships at so many different levels in an organisation that it can feel as if we need multiple personalities just to stay sane. Even if you really like your job and the people you work with, there are so many things that need to get fixed. You can see the potential of the organisation, your function and your people, if only you could all get out of the way and get things done. Mm. So why are organisations such a challenge today?
Good question. Look, I think they are really good at overcomplicating things and overthinking things and overanalyzing things, and we just, if it's not complex or difficult to understand, or if it's not, big and meaty and bulky, then it's just, we view it as too simple, too simplistic, and, what worth could it have? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And a lot of people also try to, justify their own positions and their own work, and, work typically fills the time that you have allotted to it. So we build stuff into it, and egos come into play, and human beings are very complex creatures. So it's just complexity on top of complexity. And we just can't seem to go back to basic, simple, pragmatic things with in anything that we do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at a very high level, because we are going to explore in a lot of detail, what are the 6 leadership languages that you've sort of discovered?
Yeah. So I believe that the 6 languages that leaders should have to lead anybody are strength. So they need to be strong, courageous. They need to be able to engineer their environment to get the most out of the situation or their people. They need to be able to abdicate responsibility, but not in a way that is, hand it over and walk away. It's actually stepping back, which allow their people to step forward. Trust. So trust is the foundation of just about everything. And vulnerability. So if we can be vulnerable, we can make connections with the people that we work with and build trust, and then, have better, productive relationships.
Great. Well, I'm going to start digging deep.
Okay.
I'm going to start digging deep. So I'm going to start at the start, chapter 1.
Yeah.
You speak about this idea of being the master of your own destiny. Now, the reason this resonated with me and I want to explore it with you was quite often in the work that we do with our programs, we occasionally, or maybe not so occasionally, come across leaders who say, it's not my fault, or I can't do it because of. So talk to me about this idea of master of their own destiny.
Oh, yeah. So we look, and it comes back to the fundamental attribution error, which we're all subject to. We will look at somebody and say, if they're doing something silly, we'll say that's their personality that's doing it. But if we do something silly, it's because of the situation that we're in. It's not because of our personality. So we're hardwired to, not accept accountability for the stuff that we do. So having that self-awareness to be able to actually look at what you're doing and make adjustments or corrections to what you're doing is hard work. And it's not easy for some people, and some people just refuse to go there. So, but, for a big population of us, we do have some level of self-awareness, thank God.
It's needed.
Yeah. So, and look, a blame culture is a horrifying culture to work in, because people get thrown under the bus everywhere. Yeah. And, the first smell of something going wrong, fingers start to come out and point, and, everybody backs away from owning it, which is, destructive, to say the least. But, and I always say to my kids, I'm always saying to my kids, the only person that you can control is yourself. You can control your behaviours and the way you think and the way you act, but you can't control anybody else. And it's the same thing at work. Once you take accountability for what you do and look at the actions that you take and the words that you use and the behaviours that you have, and you take ownership of those and you start to change them for what you want to see, then, you feel more confident, you feel more in control because you've got complete control over it, and you find that people start to mirror and copy you. And so it's almost like, I think I use the example of if you yawn and somebody else yawns, same principle. Yeah. We all, and it's particularly if it's good behaviours, people like to do the right thing at the heart of it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you also speak about this idea of the circle of concern versus a circle of influence, which I'm always fascinated with because I find people worrying about things that they have no control over.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, if we stop, getting upset about stuff that we can't control, I just wonder how much peace in the world there would be. Because we all, I was going up a escalator the other day, and there was 2 escalators. One wasn't working. It was at Spencer Street Station. And the man in front of me turns around and starts abusing the poor worker who was working on the escalator that wasn't working. And I just think, why? Why are you so worried and so upset and get so agitated over something that's beyond your control? Just get on with your day, keep going, make the most of it, and get off the escalator and keep going forward. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
It's anyway, but I find people constantly get so upset and so worried about stuff that's beyond your control. If you worry about the stuff that you can control and you control the stuff that you can control, which is your own behaviours, words and actions, then you're going to have a lot happier existence, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I have to agree. How do people learn to lead better?
Well, they can read my book.
Of course. Shameless plug. Everyone should go out and buy Wendy's book.
Yeah. Look, I always think that reading is a good thing to do, reading as much as you can. Observing, so looking at leaders that you admire or inspire you. What do they do? What are some of the actions that they do? What are the words that they use? How do they behave? Are they consistent? Do their words marry up with their actions and their behaviours? And mimic. I mean, we all have learnt from the leaders that we have had over the years. That's how we become our own leaders, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, making sure that you're doing or learning from the right people, I think, is the...
Well, that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Making sure that you find those leaders that are worth learning from, and that you don't learn from the ones that aren't worth learning from.
I know. And we all pick up bad habits all the time, but having the self-awareness to be able to, and the reflection to be able to look at what you do and the honesty and the authenticity with yourself to say, I could have behaved better there, or I could have done that differently, and then learning from that.
Okay. So you quote Tony Robbins here, and I'm a Tony Robbins fan, so you say don't feel as though you can't say that, because I know some people.
Yeah, I don't mind him. Yeah.
You talk about this idea that what you focus on grows, and I think that it's a really important thing for leaders to consider at the moment, because there's so much to focus on. How do they choose what to focus on to make them better leaders?
Good question. Well, I think it's, prioritising is, a skill in itself. I think, to me, I always think about Richard Branson and his view that if you have happy people, then your customers are going to be happy. So to me, as a leader, focusing on your people as a priority, to me, would be a priority, because without your people, you can't really achieve anything. So making sure that you have a good connection with each of your people, you understand them, understand how they are, how they operate, what motivates them, and then making sure that your team as a collective is tight and happy and productive. And then I think things flow on from that. So if I was a leader, that would be my first priority, is people related.
Okay. I'm a big fan of frameworks, models, anything which I think helps people to grasp a concept or an idea.
Yeah.
And in your book, you talk about the 6 levels of leadership. So I'd like to sort of go through those, if we can, and just sort of at a high level about what you think and why you believe there are those 6 levels.
Yeah. Okay. So the 6 levels are kind of how I see where people sit in organisations. So down the bottom, in a silos. If I had $1 for every leader that said to me, I've got silos happening, I reckon, I'd be pretty rich. Because, to me, that's the first sign that you're at that bottom of that framework is where you've got silos and people aren't talking to each other. You've got competition in your organisation. There is no place for competition inside an organisation. Yeah. No place. So, you've got infighting. Everybody's doing their own thing, that kind of behaviours. So that's at the bottom. And you feel isolated. If you think hard and fast about it, you're all isolated. You're not working together. Then kind of the next level up is, you're interested, but you're kind of only interested insofar as that you're half in, half out, and you're interested when it suits you, but kind of when it doesn't, then, you're not. So that's level 2. Level 3 is you're involved. You're kind of more interested than not. You're getting involved. You're making connections with your peers. You're starting to foster collaboration between the people who report to you and the people who report to your peers as well. And you're becoming more involved in the organisation kind of outside of your direct team. So you're working with your peers to achieve more for the function that you're working in. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Integrated, you're becoming more aware of what's happening organisationally, so outside of your own function and team, and you're starting to become productive and more effective, although you still face obstacles and you may not really know how to overcome those obstacles yet. Influenced, you know your way around. You can influence broader outside of your function, and other peers of your leader are getting to know who you are. So you're able to influence outside of your your direct function. And you could also be seen as, on the talent list, and you're going to be the next kind of in line to either your boss's role or your boss's peer's role. And then inspired, you're kind of on your way, you're on fire, you're developing your own people as future leaders. You're influencing outside of your organisation and almost in the industry. You are on your way to CEO, CFO, whatever floats your boat, and you you're inspirational.
So when you work with leaders, do you ask them to consider where they sit?
Yes.
What sort of responses do you get?
Varied. A lot of people feel, well, and this is the interesting bit, a lot of people feel as though they're in these silos, but again, it's their peers that are creating it, not them.
Right.
So helping them to understand how they contribute to the siloism,
yep,
and what behaviours and actions that they do that might contribute to their peers actually behaving that way, and then hence your silos. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in chapter 3, you talk about this idea of being courageous.
Yes.
Why is that important for a leader?
Because I see so many leaders just back away from the moment when they need to actually stand up and be courageous. they're not, like, for example, they might be in a meeting and they see somebody behaving badly and they just let it fly. They don't call it out, or they don't, talk to that person about their behaviours and actually do something about it, because, we often fear the repercussions of being courageous, because it's scary. We feel as though, we might lose our job, or we might be seen as the one that's behaving badly, or, it could backfire on us and somebody might get upset with us and we might ruin a relationship or lose trust. Or
So it's coming from a place of fear?
Yeah, and self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
So how do we start to educate leaders that they've got to think beyond that? Because calling bad behaviour out and being courageous is such a crucial part of leadership. How do you encourage leaders to say, no, even though I feel uncomfortable, I'm going to be courageous?
Yeah. Well, my recommendation is that they always practice being courageous, because the more, it's like a muscle, and the more courageous you are, the better at it you get. And I always like to practice what words you would use in a situation, because let's face it, most situations where you need to be courageous, you can predict, because, we see them all the time. Sadly, they're common, and you can predict. You can easily think of a scenario of which you could practice in. So we sit down and we script out, how would you say, call somebody on their bad behaviours? What are the words that you would use? And then we role play it. And by practicing using the words, when the situation arises, your brain will actually easily recall the words that you've used. So even though your heart's going to race and your breathing is going to go shallow and your palms are going to go sweaty, it's still a little easier to recall the words that you've already used.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah. Talk about shining a light.
Yeah.
What's the light and what are we shining it on?
We're shining it on our fears.
Yep.
Because we all have fears, and I'm the queen of fears. I've got all sorts of fears.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so Margie Worrell, in her book called Brave, it's brilliant. She talks about shining a light on your fear, because fear hates light. It lurks in dark places and, in the middle of the night, wakes you up and drives you mad. But if we shine a light on it, most times we kind of look at it and think, and we might talk about it, and other people have a similar fear, or other people have had that fear and tell us how they've overcome it. And so we can learn by shining a light on it. We look at it, we scrutinise it, and then we figure out, is this the worst thing that could happen to us? Probably not. Are we going to die from it? Nah, probably not either. So how can we look at it and develop strategies to overcome it?
Okay. So it's really about putting a bit of context around it and taking it out of that dark place.
Yeah. It's also about exposure therapy as well. I think, like, I hate spiders, and there's absolutely no way that I would get in a room with a spider. But there is this thing called exposure therapy where you can progressively get exposed to spiders or whatever you fear, and the theory is that you will overcome it. I will never do it in relation to spiders. I have done it in relation to my fear of flying.
Right, okay.
Yes.
And it worked?
Yes. I can quite successfully get on a plane now without having thoughts of, I'm not going to get there. It's going to be the first major air traffic accident in Australia, and it's going to be my plane. So by exposure, as well as, reading and understanding it, and I've managed to overcome it.
That's
there
great.
You go. Yeah.
That's great. Strength is an important trait for a leader to have. How do you define it, and why is it important?
So I think you need to be strong insofar as standing up for what you believe in, and being the strength behind your team, and calling stuff out and which is courageous, but it also requires strength. Making a call if you need to. You know, I've seen leadership teams discuss a topic and it just goes round and round and round so much that we all get dizzy. And nobody makes a call. Somebody needs to be strong enough to be able to make the call. And, you know, in most cases you can say, okay, I've heard everybody's views. Now my call is X. And standing by that call, not being influenced outside of your call as well. So in corridor conversations, which I've often seen, and leaders change their mind because they've had a sidebar conversation with somebody and they've influenced them to change their mind. And so that just makes them look, you know, weak and easily influenced and not standing by their decision. So,
okay.
Yeah.
You talk about change a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that leaders in particular, need to be prepared to be the drivers of change.
Yeah.
So talk to me about why leaders should be a catalyst for change.
I think being the catalyst is one thing, because I think change is inevitable. Like the whole world changes from minute to minute. I think, though, being able to support their people by understanding what their people are going through during change is equally as important. You know, neurologically, our brains look for certainty all the time, and during times of change, we don't have that certainty. And when our brains don't have certainty, we start to go into that fight, flight or fear response. And we start to make stuff up. We think about all the potential possibilities, and most of them are negative for us. And so if, as a leader, providing as much certainty as possible for our people will help to alleviate that. If we don't know some of the answers, actually saying, I don't know, but let's figure it out together, and let's build certainty together, will always help.
You give people 3 ways to help them develop their skill of strength. Are you able to share with the listeners what those 3 ways are?
Sure. They are: set the expectations with your team, first and foremost. So that is being absolutely crystal clear on what your expectations of each member are, because that then gives them clarity and certainty. And so neurologically they get it, as well as it gives you something to measure them by. And so when you need to have a conversation that if they didn't deliver it, you've got something clear and certain that to compare that to. And then your conversation with that person is much more structured and easier to have. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Hold your people to account. So, you know, that by setting that expectations up front, you do have something to keep them accountable to. So, you know, with being strong enough to be able to have that difficult conversation when they don't meet those expectations and you have to hold them account is critical. And then learn to say no. If I had $1 for every time somebody has said no and then changed their mind, I think, you know, being able to stand in front of your team and say, I've heard what everybody has said and my decision is this, which means no to you and yes to you, or no to all of you or yes to all of you. You know, either way, making that call and making that decision is absolutely critical to show that you're a strong leader.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I want to zero in on that, one of the things which drives me bonkers is in the programs we run, when we talk about expectations, and we ask people to look at it from the level of, are they clear about what the expectations are on them?
Yeah.
And then they translate it and set expectations on their teams. Yeah. Invariably, there's significant gaps there. And I think if all you did was do that, things would be so much better.
Yeah. And I kind of think, you know, sadly, you know, we're not mind readers, because if everybody was, it'd make it a whole lot easier. But you have to state your expectations down to the explaining to your mother type way, so that it's absolutely crystal clear. And it's going to feel stupid and uncomfortable because you kind of think, well, these are bright people and they have brains. Surely they'd get it. And they do get it, but if you meticulously go through what your expectations are, then there is no ambiguity and no uncertainty, and you've had that conversation up front. So your follow-up conversation, if it needs to be a difficult one, is going to be easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do leaders engineer the world around them?
Well, This was an interesting chapter to write because I initially called it manipulating the world, but manipulation has such a bad connotation to it because it is kind of manipulating, but in a positive way. You know, you need to be able to move things around for your people to be able to step in to what they need to. And I use the example of in the book where I had a leader once who wanted me to present something, and I said, no, I'm not going there, because it was to a bunch of senior leaders. And he said, yeah, you can do it. And I said, no, I'm not. I refuse to. And so he said, all right, that's fine, I'll do it. Just prepare all the slides and everything. So I did that, and then came on the day of the presentation, and he didn't show up for the time. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? So he rang me and he said, I'm stuck in traffic and you're going to have to go in and do it. So I just went in and presented it, and it was easy because it was my work and I knew what it was. So it was easy, but it was very nerve-wracking. And it went well, and, you know, everybody was happy. And then when I came out, he was at his desk and he said, I was sitting downstairs in an office, but I wanted you to do this because it's your work and you need to be able to talk to your work. And so I hated him in that moment, but it was one of the best things that he ever did for me. So I'm not suggesting that everybody should, you know, not turn up to meetings or anything like that, but using your environment to get the most out of your people is, you know, a really great way to help them to develop into great leaders as well.
Okay. I was fascinated with this idea of currency.
Oh, yeah.
And
I love that.
The fact that we all have one.
Yeah.
Apparently. So
we so do.
Yeah. So talk to us about that, the currency piece.
So this came from a book called Influence Without Authority. And I read this years ago because I could never figure out how to influence people who weren't direct reports of me. And so what they talk about is this currency. Everybody's got something that they're willing to trade or barter with to get what they want. So it might be that, so an example is, you know, if you've got a peer who really likes to be the, you know, big show off and likes to claim credit for stuff, then if you happen to be working together on something, you know, you could use that for him to claim the credit of, but in return, you know, is he able to give you something that you value in the future? So it's like you know, eBay for businesses or eBay for leaders.
Okay.
You know, you can buy and trade stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, but you just need to figure out what it is, and you can do that through observing people. And, you know, some people it's not hard. Some people it's a bit harder.
I wonder if that's a title for a book, eBay for Leaders.
Yeah.
It's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
This idea of abdicating power.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in it.
Okay.
I find that a lot of leaders that I work with find it a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
They find it a challenge.
Yeah, they do.
And they're looking for ways to learn how to do it. So what insights can you share with us around that?
So I think I always use the example of empowering our people. Like, we all think we have empowered people until it comes to crunch time when, if it's not done the way that I would do it, then, not 100% happy with it. But truly empowering our people is 50% them owning it and 50% us letting go as leaders and letting them come up with a solution that, even though it's not the way that we would do it, we still let them do it that way. And I always say that, 5 and 5 makes 10, but so does 7 and 3 and 8 and 2. So you still get to the same outcome, but through different ways. So being open to letting your people come up with an idea and run with it to get to an outcome, and stepping back and letting them own it and letting go of that control is what abdication is about.
And that's where the skinning of the cat comes into it.
Yeah. And that's right. There's many ways to skin a cat, as the saying goes. So, being open and vulnerable. It's vulnerable to let go of control of something, particularly as a leader, because, in our experience, we might have seen something done this way and it goes wrong. But, just because we've seen it one way doesn't mean that it's going to happen exactly that same way again, because you've got different minds, you've got different people, you've got different personalities in there, say, the second time, that, variables will change.
So how do we counter the experience that I'm sure many leaders have had where they've tried to abdicate and it just hasn't worked the way they wanted to? And I'm thinking of myself in a particular circumstance here.
Yeah.
It tends to make them a little bit more gun shy into doing it. So how do we encourage them to keep trying?
Yeah. Well, you have to be conscious of it and start small. So if you've had something that's gone wrong, then go back to starting small. So start with small pieces of work that you give up, and trust is also important here. You need to be able to trust the person that's actually you're handing it over to. And so if you have that solid foundation of trust, even if they fail, you need to debrief and make sure that the person has learned from it, and everybody gets something out of it, even though it might have turned out different to what you really wanted. So
well, that's a perfect segue into chapter 7, because I wanted to talk to you about trust.
Yeah,
because you talk about this idea that you trust, but you as a leader are also trusted.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that pathway of thinking about that? Number one, do you trust as a leader? Number two, do your people actually trust you? Because I wonder if many leaders have actually asked themselves that.
Yeah, well, I dare say they haven't, in my experience. But you're right. You need to, to me, trust is the foundation of every relationship and every positive relationship that we have. It impacts productivity and engagement and safety and so many things in an organisation, yet it's so undervalued as far as I'm concerned. We just don't appreciate the worth of it. But so, and this, your behaviours and your words and your actions need to align to show that your people, that you are trustworthy. And as well as you need to be able to trust your people to be able to stand up and do their job, which comes back to abdicating and letting them do it. So all of the languages are really interlinked in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's takes courage to step back and let people lead, and it makes you vulnerable as well. And you need to have that trust in the relationship. So they're all kind of woven into each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talk about these top 5 trust killers.
Oh, yeah.
Which I like. I love the language, trust killers.
Yeah, yeah. So they are.
So talk to them about the trust killers.
Okay. So inaction. So when leaders don't take action or don't step in and do the right thing, or they're passive and they just don't, do anything, that says to people that, their actions don't align to their words. And, we're always looking at people and leaders and everybody else to see whether things line up. And, it's like a bullshit radar. People will pick it up in an instant if leaders are saying something and not doing the what they say. Competition, there is no place for competition inside an organisation. And, I look at Sony was a perfect example of that. They had all the components of an iPod at the same time that Apple did, but they just had this culture of competition and, poor behaviours and silos, and nobody spoke to each other. So, and you kind of think, where would they be if they didn't have that, if they, had a cohesive leadership group. Fear, people living in a state of fear. If you live in a state of fear, you can't trust. Your brain just can't do that. So if you don't have trust, then you I kind of think there's no point. You need to have trust as a foundation. And if you don't, then you've got serious problems. So while people live in fear, they can't trust. Blame, this is throwing people under the bus, pointing fingers at people. I've seen this just destroy a function in an organisation because people just took no accountability for anything and they blamed others. And then gossip. So, that gossip is a good sign. Where you've got lots and lots of gossip, then, it's a clear sign that there's not much trust going on. So, the taking notice of the internal grapevine and what's being said and what's going on is a good indicator to whether you've got trust or you don't.
So if leaders have heard those 5 trust killers,
yep,
and they can clearly put their finger on one, I think I've got, competition or blame or gossip or fear.
Mm-hmm.
What can they do about it? Where do they start? What do they do?
Yeah. Well, they start with their own behaviours, and it's a journey to come back from low trust, but it certainly can be done, and it involves a lot of open and honest conversations with a lot of people, acknowledging that, your role in it and how you've led people that with relationships that haven't had a foundation of trust, and what you plan to do about that, and setting out a plan, but importantly actually following through and walking your talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
In chapter 8, you talk about this idea of being vulnerable.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you've noticed or come across when you've spoken to leaders about this idea of being vulnerable? Yeah. Because it doesn't come naturally to everyone.
No, it doesn't. It's scary.
Yeah.
And we all don't like to do it because it makes us feel, that we're exposing our, inner self and our inner secrets, and which it doesn't have to be that deep ever. But we do need to take a deep breath, and it can be as simple as sharing a story about something that has gone wrong in the past, or, something that happened that you had a lesson with, or something that, somebody didn't trust you and how you came back from that. Sharing these personal stories with your people. What it says to us neurologically is, you're just like me, because I've been in that situation as well. And, and I know how uncomfortable and scary it is. So when we have that commonality with people, we find that we build trust easily with each other. So being vulnerable, sharing your stories helps to build trust.
Because I notice I'm pretty active, as most of the listeners would know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And I tend to quite often see videos of people saying, this is my first video on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting to see them go through that. And most of the time, they're actually very good.
Yeah.
So they have this fear in themselves, but that doesn't actually translate to what me as the viewer is seeing.
No, isn't that interesting? It's, I've done a video for LinkedIn and it was frightening, and I did about 50,000 takes of it before I was remotely happy with what it was. And I felt this, it has to be word perfect. Yeah. But somebody said to me, people actually like it when you and ah and jump around and go on a thought path and come back to it, and because it looks more natural. But you just don't think that. You think that you have to be perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fascinating and scary.
Talk about this idea of connection creation.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm particularly interested in that because for me, connection is probably the number one thing that I'm looking to do with the people that report to me, the people around me, my customers, my suppliers, everyone. Yeah. So what's this? Talk to me about that, connection creation.
It's like we have so much technology in our face nowadays that I sometimes wonder if we're losing the art of the conversation, because, I worked with a guy once who used to instant message good morning to his people who sat within, 10 metres of his desk. So yeah, I know, which is like bizarre. So, we just don't seem to want to look people in the eye and have a conversation. I mean, if you jump on any public transport these days, that's all you see is people on their phones and or reading and not looking up and having a conversation. So we need to be able to connect with people to be able to build trust and, our brains, again, say this person's like me. And if you're like me and we've got things in common, then I'm more likely to trust you. So, getting to know your people is critical, and getting to know your peers and your boss as well, more than the superfluous, good morning. Yeah. That kind of stuff. You need to get to know people in their lives and understand that commonality that you have with them. And we all have things in common, always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And anybody who says they have nothing in common with someone is lying or hasn't looked hard enough. Yeah. Yeah.
So the final, in part 3 of the book, you talk about this idea of practicing the behaviour.
Oh, yeah.
So how do people go out and practice these languages of leadership? Where do they start? What should they do?
Well, I always say, talk to somebody that you trust, like a colleague or, your partner or somebody that understands the world that you're in, and sit down with them and practice all the things in the book. And if you start to practice, they then start to be built in your life. When you want to change a behavior, it's like a pendulum moving. So you have to focus on it, that it's so much that it feels like it's gone into the extreme before the pendulum comes back and settles in the middle. And it's the same with behavior. You have to focus on it so much to change it that it feels like the extreme and you're always focusing on it. But eventually it comes back to the middle and it's ingrained in your behavior and you do it without thinking. So, practicing getting as much exposure to the situations that you want to be able to deal with is the first step that I would do. And practice with a trusted colleague.
Okay. Are there any books or people that inspire you?
Yes. So I like Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote
Outliers.
Yeah, but I haven't read that, but he wrote Blink.
Yep.
Yeah, and it talks about how we look at people and make assumptions in the blink of an eye, and what that means for us both individually and as a society. So having that understanding of what processing your brain is going through quickly can help you to overcome your biases that you have, and we all have biases. And so getting that insight to me is very valuable. So he's one. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability.
The Dare to Lead, is that her book?
Yeah,
Dare to Lead, yeah.
Patrick Lencioni, he's
5 Dysfunctions.
Yeah, he's really good. And I think that's and Gabrielle Dolan, all her books are really good.
Okay.
Storytelling, she's brilliant at storytelling, and I think storytelling is a skill that all leaders should have.
Yeah. Did you see Patrick Lencioni when he came out?
Yeah, I did.
How was it?
Brilliant.
He's good?
Oh, yeah. Did you see him?
No.
Oh, it was very entertaining.
Okay.
And very insightful. Yeah, it was great. And I'm going to see Brene when she comes out in August as well.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So if people want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where should they go?
So I have a website, wendyborn.com.au, or I'm on LinkedIn as well, so they can find me there. Or my contact details are in the back of the book as well. So, yeah. And I'm always open to have a conversation with anybody to help them.
Yeah, great. And I'm going to encourage people that if you are going to send Wendy a LinkedIn message, please personalise it. I keep banging on about this idea that if you want to connect with someone who you don't know, personalise the message. Don't just say, I want to connect with you. It's one of my bugbears. So please connect with Wendy, but please personalise it. Tell her that you heard the interview. Tell her how much you like this interview and just make it a little bit personal, please.
And there's statistics on that
Is
if
there?
you personalise a message, I think there's like an 80% chance that people will actually accept.
Oh, there you go.
I know.
There you go.
I know.
I've been banging on for ages and I still get all these connection
it's-
requests, just no one taking the time.
I know. I agree.
So any last words on leadership?
Stick with it.
Yep.
Is my kind of advice. It's hard, and it's hard. Some days are worse than others, but keep going, take small steps, keep learning, keep trying different things, keep, looking at your fears and keep being vulnerable and, just keep going. You'll get there in the end.
Well, on that note, Wendy Born, thank you so much for being on the Synergen Leadership Podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, that wraps up episode 73 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast, another great author interview for you. I would like to encourage you to head on over to the Synergen Group website and engage in the conversation with us. Tell us what you liked about the episode, tell us who you'd like us to interview, or tell us what sort of content you'd like us to deliver to. And if you are an iPhone user, please feel free, head on over to the Apple site, leave us a review. It really does help us build awareness of the podcast. In next week's episode, we have another curriculum ecosystem episode for you, where I explore some of the ideas that Synergen Group has around how to manage conflict. It's another great content episode. Until then, love to hear what you think and happy listening.